Hi everyone, and welcome to lesson 6 of the series that I've been doing on the nature poetry from the Educast anthology. This one is perhaps probably the most challenging one, I would say, quite complex one. That's To Autumn by John Keats. So what I will do is I will take you through it the best I can, and perhaps we won't deal with every single thing in the poem. I will just pick out the main elements for you so you don't become too overwhelmed by it. But I will talk about that as we go through. All right, so just to recap everyone, as always on the slides I've been showing you, there are the poems that we've been studying. So we have done Death of a Naturalist, Hawk Roosting, we're doing To Autumn today, excerpt from the Prelude, Ozymandias, and of course I've got The Soldier and Mamet's Wood in there, which I'm not going to deal with in this series. I will look at that with the war poetry section, but they do deal with aspects of nature as well. Just to get you thinking really, just to activate your brains, I suppose. So what form in the nature series have most of our poems taken? And what I mean by that is the way that it's set out on the page. So is it to do with the meter, as in the metrical measurement of the line? What do you think? What do you think mostly have they dealt with? Have they done? And the other question as well is, what do you think an ode might be? Because this poem is actually an ode, even though it doesn't say Ode to Autumn, it is actually an ode written by John Keats. So put me on pause if you want to go and find out and look back at the poems that we've done in the nature section, and if you want to have a look and see what I'm talking about and the way that they're written. Or you might be thinking, I've no idea what Miss Boyd-Rugen's talking about here. Then I will reveal it to you in the next slide. So I'm just going to show you now. All right then, so as you can see, I've just highlighted there just the nature poems on the left hand side, and most of them, except Hawk Roosting, are written in iambic pentameter. So again, I could ask you why there. Put me on pause now if you want to, if you want to have a little think about why they're written in iambic pentameter. I think some of you may have guessed here. Some of you may be waiting for me to give the answer. Some of you might put me on pause, etc. So the idea of iambic pentameter is always associated with sonnets and love poetry. Not that all of those poems have been sonnets, it's just the fact that it almost, because it's dealing with nature, they're almost to do with that respect and that love for nature, even if it's in various forms that we've come across. You know, if you think of Ozymandias, this is the idea that he was, it wasn't so much the fact that he was in love with nature, it was the fact that he was in love with himself, and he thought that he could defy nature. Then of course of course he couldn't. So, you know, Hawk Roosting is not written that way, possibly because it's written from the hawk's point of view. The fact is that the hawk is nature. It doesn't really need to respect anything else out there. That hawk it was very egocentric, wasn't it, that poem? It was all about that hawk and that element of nature being very, very powerful and authoritative. So really it's just kind of thinking about, you know, the way that poems are set and what is the reason behind that. Right then, so the answer to the question, what is an ode? Okay, so I've kind of had a little look around, and even though, of course, you know, many teachers, we know what odes are. We studied odes when we've done our degree, but I thought I'd have a little look around and just see what kind of people said about odes in particular. So it is a form of lyrical poetry in which poets use a certain metrical pattern. So I think at one time odes were used for song, which is why it's called lyrical poetry, because you could kind of pass the information on quite quickly through song, a little bit like ballads, I suppose. And normally it was written in iambic pentameter, and so that's normally but not always, and the rhyme scheme tends to be AB AB, so it's quite a simple rhyme scheme to it, and just to express their feelings about how they felt about it. And it does tend to be, which is quite fitting really, because if it's written in iambic pentameter and it's written in a rhyme scheme of AB AB, then it's structured, and what it's doing is it praises or glorifies an event or an individual or even an object. You can do an ode to an object, which is what John Keats did. So, as I said, Keats wrote 6 odes altogether, his most famous one being Ode to a Nightingale. When an ode's theme is nature, it describes it intellectually as well as emotionally, so it personifies nature. And I think we can kind of understand that now from all the poems that we've done so far, that most of them do use personification when they're dealing with nature. And then this actual poem itself, and again, you know, it isn't actually called Ode to Autumn, it's just called To Autumn. He actually composed this poem after a countryside walk, and he was quite excited and moved by what he saw. And in the poem itself, he clearly captured the sights, the sounds, the smells that he experienced. So he used all his senses, the way that he felt about this particular season of the year. There we go, the usual top 3 bands, what we're looking for when you do a poetry analysis. And I'm not going to go through those 3 bands today because I have actually covered those in the last set of poems that I've done in this series. So if you do want to go back and just remind yourself, then that is fine. So band 3, band 4 and band 5, that is for a 15-mark question. Okay, it's all about being perceptive and about being confident with your analysis of language and structure. And we're also going to be looking there, so we're going to be looking at poetry use of language, structure, which is AO2, and contextual influences, which is AO3. All right, so as always, everyone, be prepared. You will find this poem on page 16 of the anthology. Get your highlighters ready. You might want some paper for this because it does fill up most of the page. And again, make sure you've read the poem first. You can actually get it on YouTube as well. Someone's actually reading it, and it's quite nice because it's got some images to go with it as well. And there you go, as always, everyone. There's your little guide there. And I must admit, I have not used this one an awful lot this time because I found that my ideas didn't always tally with theirs in particular, but that is fine, okay, because we all find our own ideas with poetry, as long as we don't drift away from the real meaning too far. Okay, so as always, we look at context, and should we just have a little look at John Keats himself? So I've just before I read this with you, just at the bottom, I've just put a little challenge, and it says, if you've read the poem first, then this will help you. But please read through it and just skim through it. If you really don't want to read it on your own, just skim through it quickly or listen to a reading of it. But can you spot anything in the poem that might reflect the context of where John Keats was writing? So let's have a little look at his life. So John Keats is generally classified as one of the romantic poet again. And as we know, Romanticism was a general artistic movement, literature, music, the visual arts, amongst others, which dominated European culture from the last part of the 18th century until the mid-19th century. Among its key aspects were a deep appreciation of the power and beauty of nature, that we've seen that before, a recognition of the influences of the senses and of personal emotion. So this idea, the way that you feel in the natural environment, how it makes you feel, an understanding our emotions as well, and an understanding of the deeper meaning of life. Remember what we talked about with Ozymandias, that, you know, Shelley in particular, the romantic poets, didn't like authority in particular, you know, really respected the environment around them and really what was important about life. So all of these may be seen at work in Keats' To Autumn, which reflects on mankind's relationship with a particular time of year. He wrote the poem inspired by a walk he'd taken through the countryside, that we said before. Therefore, it's a highly personal response. Keats initially trained as a surgeon, but gave it up to write poetry. 6 months after completing To Autumn, he experienced his first signs of tuberculosis that would end his life. In the poem, it's almost as though he understood that his life would soon end and he's preparing himself for death. Keats died in 1821, aged just 25. Despite his short life, Keats had a major impact on poetry and is regarded as one of the most important poets in literary history. I just want to thank Miss Crozier, by the way, for that information, because that was some stuff that she put together. It's quite interesting, isn't it, you know, the way that he did write and the way he romanticised things around him. Did he understand that he was only on this planet for so long, and he wanted to appreciate what was there? Right, so everyone, because this is quite a challenging poem and it's, it is 19th century, so we do need to make sure that some of these words that you do understand what they do mean, because they are words that we don't even use today, some of them. So have a little go, okay, go and find out what they mean, and you can annotate them in your poem as well if you want to. So what I'm going to do, as always, is I'm going to tell you what each of these phrases or words mean, and then you can find them in the poem. So it's completely up to you how you do this, but if you want to do it on your own, then please pause me here, because I'm just about to reveal now what each of these words actually mean. So here we go. Sorry it's all come on at once, by the way. I'll just take you through each one. It's quite a lot to take in there, isn't it? So bosom friend is a close friend, someone you may confide in. Thatch eaves, you can see a little picture in the right hand corner there. So it's where a thatched roof hangs over the wall of a building. So it's where it joins. A gourd is a fruit of the pumpkin or squash plant family. You can just see them there in the plants there to the right hand side. A kernel or a kernel is the edible part of a nut. Cells refers to here as the chambers in the bee's honeycomb. So those little sort of holes you can see there. And winnowing, okay, now winnowing is when they separate what we call the wheat from the chaff in a piece of grain. So it's actually getting flowing air through the grain, and what it does is it takes the bits out that humans can't digest. And you can actually see there that lady, she's actually using some sort of sieve. She's throwing it up and down to get the air into it, to remove all the chaff out of it. That phrase, by the way, separating the wheat from the chaff, is separating the goodness from the bad, because we can also use it as a metaphor as well when referring to some situation. Furrow is a long, narrow trench created by a plough on a field. A swath is a line or a crop as it lies when it's been reaped, so when it's actually been ploughed, so you can just see the actual lines going up the field. A gleaner, now a gleaner is someone whose job it is to collect fallen grain. So maybe that's, I don't know if they still do it today, maybe, but that would have been a job on a farm, especially in the 18th and 19th century when everything was done manually. Sallows are just another word for willow trees. So you can see a willow tree there on the right hand side. And you've got the word bourne, which is, in this context, it's to do with a boundary or a small stream, something that separates something. And treble is a high-pitched singing voice, and croft is land used for farming, and it's often temporary, so you might rent it from the farmer or something like that and just use it for whatever you need to at that time. So that's a croft. So some words there that we probably don't use in our daily lives at the moment. I'm sure if there's anyone who works in the countryside might actually identify with some of those words there. All right, so here we go, everyone. We've got the actual poem itself, and you can see the link that I've put on there. You may not be able to do it through the video, but you can actually just have a look on YouTube, because there's some nice... So the actual poem itself is being read, and the images come up onto the screen. It's quite nice, actually. It's quite worth tuning into that one. So let's just go through the poem. And again, if you don't want to listen to me, you can just read it yourself. You can listen to the YouTube version, or you can just skip ahead if you feel quite happy with the poem. So here we go. This is Keats walking through the countryside in autumn. Season of mists and mellow fruitfulness, close bosom friend of the maturing sun, conspiring with him how to load and bless with fruit the vines that round the thatch eaves run, to bend with apples the mossed cottage trees, and fill all fruit with ripeness to the core, to swell the gourd and plump the hazel shells with a sweet kernel, to set budding more and still more, later flowers for the bees, until they think warm days will never cease, for summer has o'erbrimmed their clammy cells. Who had not seen thee oft amid thy store? Sometimes whoever seeks abroad may find thee sitting careless on a granary floor, thy hair soft lifted by the winnowing wind, or on a half-reaped furrow sound asleep, drowse with the fume of poppies, while thy hook spurs the next swath and all its twined flowers. and sometimes, like a gleaner, thou dost keep steady thy laden head across a brook, or by a cider press with patient look. Thou watchest the last oozings, hours by hours. Where are the songs of spring? Aye, where are they? Think not of them. Thou hast thy music too, while barred clouds bloom the soft dying day, and touch the stubble plains with rosy hue. Then in a wailful choir the small gnats mourn among the silver river sallows borne aloft, or sinking as the light wind lives or dies, and full-grown lambs loud bleat from hilly bourne. Hedge crickets sing, and now with treble soft the red breast whistles from a garden croft, and gathering swallows twitter in the skies. It's quite relaxing, that poem, when you actually read it that way. All right, so again, if you're still looking at vocabulary, if you're still looking at language, then please feel free to do that. But I'm now going to move on and look at the deeper analysis of the poem. So before we do look at that though, it is quite important that you do get some sense of what is going on in this poem. So you might want to do this on paper, or you might already have worked this out, but it actually, the way that it's structured is the way that it almost reflects his walk as he's going through the day. As he's going through the day and he's kind of thinking about autumn. So we've got here, first of all, in the first stanza, the poem begins by describing the plentiful nature at the start of autumn. There is an abundance of produce. So when we read it, you'll be able to see how much produce and goodness that the autumn actually brings before that dreaded season of winter sets in. And then we move on and we look at the beauty of the season, and it's described throughout the poem, but he lovingly addresses autumn here, personifying it, and then he shares that enjoyment with the reader as well. And then towards the end of the poem, he reflects on the passage of time. Autumn fades as winter approaches. There is an underlying sadness as everything withers and dies. So it's quite nice the way you get that, because autumn is a season of changes. It does start off really, really beautiful, and then it ends up, withering and dying and going into winter. So it's quite effective the way that he actually describes this in the poem. So if you want to have a little bit of a break and you want to really, before you move on to analysis, because you should really try and understand what the poem is telling us first before we do deeply analyse it, then have a look at these 5 questions if you want. So how does the mood of the poem change as it progresses? How does the run across line 7 and 8 add to the sense of abundance? How does stanza 1 contrast to stanza 2? Why do you think the poet chose to personify autumn? Explain your answer. And why do you think Keats wrote this poem in the form of an ode? Okay, so I'll leave you with those 5 questions. It's just really for you to think about the poem if you want to have a little bit of a break before you go deeper into it. So, autumn then. I think it's quite important that we do understand here where he was coming from and what he was thinking. You may feel it's quite strange to write a poem about a particular season, but he was obviously quite affected by it. And don't forget, he was part of the Romantic movement as well. So this wouldn't have been alien to him to express his feelings and emotions about his environment and the way that he felt about life. But just have a look at autumn. So if we have a look, we start thinking, don't we, about these things. So you're changing colours. So from the summer is green, going to your lovely reds and oranges before they die and fall from the trees. It's also a time of harvest, so where they plough the fields, they take in all the grain, they take in the lovely produce like apples from the trees. Lots and lots of lovely produce that we get. And of course, if any of you have ever been to Harvest Festival, then you'll know what I mean. They do it in quite a lot of schools, so where you all take food in to celebrate the harvest. And now, of course, it's food that we take in, isn't it, for things like food banks, people who are in need. You do get cooling temperatures in autumn. It starts to get colder, starts off quite sunny after the summer, and then of course it goes towards the winter. You've got those darkening nights and the days do get shorter, and then you've got animals start preparing for cold months, and plants start making food, and then everything in nature slowly starts to fall asleep. I quite like that idea that everything at the beginning is in abundance, and there's so much around in terms of produce. and then everything just starts to fall asleep, getting set in for the winter and the long cold months. Right, everyone, here we go. So like I said before, I didn't want to overwhelm you with this too much because there's so much that you can do with this poem. You could spend quite a long time on it. So what I've tried to do is I've tried to pick out things that have a pattern or things that really do say something about what he was thinking at that time. You can feel free to add anything that you want to. Okay, right, here we go. So right at the beginning, we've got this idea, this is the season. This is the season where we see mists and this idea of mellow fruitfulness. So immediately it talks about autumn. And that alliteration of M, so the coming through, creates a soothing, gentle and quite a calm sound from the very, very beginning. And the exclamation mark there right at the end of the line, as always, exclamation marks, this idea that it highlights something, but it also highlights, you know, the awe and wonder of this season. He obviously feels in awe of the season. And this idea of fruitfulness, it does create the idea of abundance and plenty, but it also means productive as well. So it is a season of being productive. So whether it helped Keats be productive in the way that he was writing, you know, it's the idea that autumn itself is productive, it's full of abundance. It's quite a nice word to use, that. So here, and again, I'm showing you the patterns that are appearing through the actual poem. So you've got this idea, you've got a close bosom friend, you've got a maturing sun, you've got conspiring with him. So it's personifying the sun here. So let's just have a look. Let's just take it step by step first of all. So the autumn, if you think about personification here, this is where it can get quite complex, but just think along these lines, though autumn is almost human, okay? So it holds on to the sun as it needs him. So he has used the word him when it refers to the sun. So each of them need each other here to provide fruit on the trees and the vines. So autumn relies on the maturing sun, because don't forget summer's come to an end, to help produce that fruit. So in autumn as well, the sun is actually lower and it's not as strong. So it also needs autumn, because autumn is slightly warmer. The use of personification suggests that they're working together. So they're conspiring with each other before they both die and winter arrives. Here as well, I've picked out quite a bit in terms of verbs and adjectives. So you might have spotted this already, because I know that some of you will already have analysed this. So this first stanza is rich with verbs and adjectives to create an abundance of activity before the harvest. So you've got words like load, bend, fill, swell, plump, sweet, budding, more, so it's coming more and more. There's lots and lots of this lovely produce around, you know, the idea of the gourd, which is the squash. You've got the fruits, you've got the hazelnuts, you've got the nuts, you've got the flowers, all these different parts that we associate with autumn at the beginning. So you've got the last bit of life in the form of food and goodness is given to us by nature before the winter comes. It's almost like a gift that we get, isn't it? And then here, right at the end, I thought was quite clever. So this, when he talks about the later flowers for the bees, so you still do get flowers in the autumn because you've still got those quite warm days. And what he's saying here, you know, later flowers for the bees until they think warm days will never cease, for summer has overbrimmed their clammy shells. So the very last flowers of the year, I suppose, that trick the bees that summer is still here. Due to those few warm days that we still have, but summer has almost provided too much of them. They're overbrimmed with it. It's now time to stop. It's like nature is saying this is the time to stop now because winter is on its way, and there it is, the hint that winter is coming. Notice how I've not picked out every single thing in that stanza. I picked out the things that are quite important and quite significant, and things that have patterns as well. Look for patterns in poetry. Okay, so the second stanza then, look at this all the way through. Now, for those of you who are familiar with Shakespeare or, you know, even 18th and 19th century language, when you have that idea of thee and thy, and thou, you know, it's speaking, Keats is speaking to autumn here. And the idea that he addresses autumn directly like a loved one. Now, notice the form of thee and thy, which is what I said before. Some people assume it's a woman, okay, that he's almost likening autumn to a woman, as it's quite soft and feminine, but we are stereotyping here. It doesn't really matter. You read this from a modern point of view here. It wouldn't really matter who it was addressing, whether it was male, female, anything. So he talks throughout the stanza as though everywhere he looks, he sees elements of autumn. So you can see as it goes through, he's saying, thee sitting careless on a granary floor, thy hair soft lifted, you know, right at the last line, thou watchest the last oozing hours by hours. So he really is tracking that idea that autumn is real and is almost a person and someone that we love, or something that we love, through the use of thee and thy, which is a term of endearment when you're using the word you instead of using the word you. And then this idea that using the word careless, which is in purple, and the winnowing wind, it gives it an almost carefree and relaxed tone, as though autumn is becoming tired. So the alliteration of the w sound, w, creates a soft breeze. So winnowing, which is what we said before, also refers to a farming method of blowing air to get the best bit to grain. And I said before to you about separating the wheat from the chaff, so the good from the bad. So it's almost like autumn is holding on to the last bit of goodness before it's harvested, before it's taken away. But you can just see right at the beginning, can't you? They're sitting careless on a granary floor, their hair soft lifted by the winnowing wind. It's really, really calm and relaxed as you read it. And then again, this sleepy atmosphere is reinforced by things to do with sound asleep, drowse with the fume of poppies. So you've still got those poppies that are growing in the fields. So this sleepy atmosphere is reinforced with asleep and drowsed. It's interesting also that some people have said that that he would use the poppies as well. Now, obviously, poppies is a flower that grows into the autumn. And to suggest that autumn is intoxicated, so it's almost like it's taken away in another world, almost, of the fume of poppies. But also as well, not to make it too complicated, but it's the idea that poppies are also have connotations of the drug opium, and opium was taken quite a lot in the 19th century, and we don't know whether Keats did, by the way. I don't know that for sure. Some people suggested maybe he did. But it's that idea that it creates that illusion of something that's quite intoxicated, and it's almost as if autumn is drowsy and wanting to go to sleep, and is in a good way. You could see it's actually it feels nice, it feels good, it feels calm, it feels relaxed. And then here you've got that semantic field. So you've got the words that have got something in common with each other, of farm machinery. Now, this stanza itself, even though it's addressing autumn directly, I think sometimes people might misinterpret this. Depends how you do interpret it, by the way, but some people take the second stanza as being about the workers and what the workers do in autumn and the harvest. But I feel it's to do with the fact that what he's doing is he's giving us these words because these tools are used during harvest. So you've got the hook, the spurs, you've got the gleaner, you've got the cider press. But here it's almost related to the harvest and human industry, but it's also reminding us that autumn provides for us in the way that the workers in the harvest also get that food to provide for us. So I think he's using that word to suggest that autumn is working hard to provide for us before the winter sets in. And then here, that last oozing hours by hours. Again, it's still that sleepy atmosphere, isn't it? It's quite slow, but autumn is trickling away bit by bit. And again, a sign that winter will soon take over. And then the very last stanza, you've got those questions. Always look for questions in poetry. You know, why does the poet ask questions? Does he want an answer? Does she want an answer? But where are the songs of spring? Aye, where are they? Okay, so you've got 2 consecutive rhetorical questions, which suggests that the poet acknowledges that the reader might be questioning that spring is better than autumn, due to the fact that spring is about new life, isn't it? We associate new life. It could also seem that spring is a long way off as well. So he's kind of saying, you know, where are the songs of spring? Oh, where are they? You know, this is coming to an end now. Autumn's coming to an end. We need spring to happen again. Again, you can take that any way that you want to, but he's just questioning, I think, and he's just getting the reader to think about the idea of autumn and, you know, do we long for spring now that autumn's coming to an end? And here it says, think not of them, thou hast thy music too. So he's going back and he's actually speaking back to autumn again. So he reassures himself, think not of them now, okay? Autumn, you also have your music. You're also just as happy because you also have this surrounding beauty as well around you. And again, I've gone through there and I've looked at language that's quite negative. So this tone has changed a little bit here in the last stanza. And you've got those words that are used there. So you've got your dying day, you've got stubble plains of the field, you know, where it's been cut and all the produce is gone, the grain's gone, the goodness is gone. The wailful choir of gnats, who are mourning, you know, grieving. You've got the idea of something sinking. You've got the idea that something dies. So it is much more negative. And, you know, the stubble plains, like I said before, it's an evocative image of a reaped field. The harvest is done and autumn is coming to an end. The idea of gnats, you know, little midges, you know, associated with summer. We do associate with summer, don't we? Now they mourn summer because they've got nothing there now to feed from. So even they are mourning the idea that autumn is here and summer has gone. But autumn is also coming to an end as well. We need to remember what he's trying to say here. Okay, so he mentions about the redbreast, which is the robin, and that signals the coming of winter, because we do tend to see robins in the winter. They do tend to be a bird that we do see in winter. I know we do see them the rest of the year, but also swallows as well. So swallows migrate for the winter, but it's not permanent. So the time of writing this, by the way, it is summertime, and you will just start to see the swallows coming back because it's getting warmer. So he almost puts that sense of hope in that, yes, winter is coming, but it's not permanent because swallows do come back. They do come back when the warmer days are here. So there will be new life again. It isn't just all doom and gloom. Okay, so that takes me really, and again, I haven't done every single thing about language because I didn't really want to overwhelm you, like I said before. If you want to go away and find out more about that poem, then please do so. But hopefully I picked out the most important things for you, and that you can get to grips with what he was trying to tell us about the love that he had for this season as well. Let's just have a look at form and structure then, what he uses. So as we said before, you know, about iambic pentameter, it's mostly got, if you go through it, you'll find that it's mostly got an AB rhyme structure. So the first and third line rhyme, second and fourth, so on, rhyme with each other. But this does change, it does change throughout it. So if you go through it, you will see how it's not completely AB all the way through. And I think here, you know, we always look at these things, don't we, and think, well, why would that be? Why would the poet do that? And he's not here to ask. So we will just assume that what's happening here is that it changes, perhaps to reflect that autumn is a changing season. And always use that word, by the way. Perhaps he was trying to suggest this. Perhaps he was doing this. Now, his other odes, it's really quite important to, which is why context is quite important here. His other odes do have 10 lines in each stanza, but this one's got 11. And again, perhaps to show the plentiful abundance of nature, that it almost overflows, you know, with this love that he has for this season. And as we know, this is inspired by a country walk that Keats took. But it can also refer to the moving of time as well. So as you go through the poem, it can refer to a bigger picture. So let's just have a look at this. So if you look at the first stanza, you could actually look at it and think, okay, everything's alive, everything's joyful. You could maybe think of the idea that, you know, it's the idea of morning time. And then, but you can also take it further as well and think about perhaps he is referring here to early autumn, about how everything is around and how everything is in abundance. To keep using that word over and over again, by the way, because it's so important. And then you've got the idea the second stanza starts to get a little bit sleepy. So you could link it with mid-afternoon, and also taking it a bit wider, you could actually compare that with mid-autumn. So things are starting to slow a little bit, things are coming to an end a little bit, moving its way into, you probably guessed it, moving its way into evening. And there you go. So third stanza, it could be the end of the day. As he's walking through, it could be coming towards the end of the day. He's thinking about sunset. He's thinking about, you know, everything coming to an end. So it is the end of autumn as well, and the approach of winter. It's quite nice, that, I think, to have those ideas running through it. Okay, so something I've not done for a while, since lesson 3. And lesson 2, I think I did it as well. So I gave you a question. Now that was because we were doing work on poetry at the time. These are just extra sessions that I'm putting on just so you can maybe revise, you can get used to it. You may come back to these in year 11 and you might want to do some practice with it. But just to give you an idea, if you want to have a little go at doing a question, by all means, please, if you do one, please send it in to me or your English teacher, and then we can have a look, we can mark it and give you some feedback, because you're learning all the time about these poems. So 2 types of questions on the exam. So let's have a look. This one's worth 15 marks. So To Autumn is about the change and transformation of nature. How does John Keats present the change and transformation of nature in the poem? Remember to refer to the context of the poem in your answer, but only things that are relevant, by the way. So that one is only just on the poem itself. That's worth 15 marks. And then choose one of the poem from the anthology in which the poet also writes about the change and transformation of nature. Compare the way the poet presents change and transformation of nature in your chosen poem with the way John Keats presents it in To Autumn. Okay, so just very, very typical of questions that you would see. But if you do want to go back, you want to have a go at doing this and you can't remember how to do it, then go back and have a look at my lesson 3 about how to compare the poetry. And I did use Hawk, Roosting and Death of a Naturalist to actually give you examples there. Okay, set yourself the challenge. And like I said, if you do, please send it to us and we'll mark it for you. So that's it, everyone. That concludes the series of nature poems. And like I said before, you know, I will see you soon, hopefully. And the next set that's going to go on, I think I am probably going to go with the war poetry. But it doesn't really matter what we do next. You'll have 2 lots to come anyway, war poetry and love poetry. And we'll also have a look at the ones in between. Okay, so take care, everyone, and I will see you soon. Any questions at all, you know, you can email us or you can contact us via Show My Homework. Okay, take care, everyone. Bye-bye.